I'm going to share some data that I've been collecting over the years doing brain mapping studies of healers. And I've also worked with some meditators, and the healers include mystics and shamans. You'll see some data on some shamans as well. Now, how did I ever get into something like this? And I'll briefly give you the story. I was working at the University of Washington Medical Center, running an EEG lab there in the Department of Radiology. And I attended one of those whole life body expo. I got on a table and received a Reiki treatment. And I got off 20 minutes later, seeing a halo around the woman and feeling like something had really happened, had shifted inside of me. Now, I've done a lot of body work, transformational work, psychoactives, etc. So I knew something had happened. So I left there with that thought that this may be available. You might see something if you hook up a healer to an EEG machine and discover that they're doing something different. So that was the seed that started this, and in a short time I was enrolled in a Reiki group, and I got up to second level, and I'm a Reiki practitioner. I don't do it a lot, but I love to do it. So I had access to all this Reiki community. So they started coming in the lab, and I started to hooking them up and getting data, and pretty soon other healers were learning about this, and they were coming and knocking on the door, and before long I had a large sample to work with. I like to show this slide because I think this is where it all starts. This is a beautiful image of a rock painting from South Africa about approximately 10,000 years. And it shows a healing circle. And in the center is the healer, shaman. You can't see the client very well. It's kind of washed out. But he's doing hands-on healing. And the circle is all of the support in traditional healing rituals. The people participate. This guy here has his rack of antennas in place and everything, and he's probably also a healer working with perhaps life force energy depicted there by the snake. All right, so this is just something very quick. Most of these healers describe it as some energy. There's many traditions, and the common word is something like mana, energy, chi, elan vital, arutam in the tradition of the Ecuadorian shuar, kundalini, etc. Some people just say, I just channel Christ energy. I just channel universal life force energy. It works through me. So, and I've had the good fortune to meet many healers of many diverse traditions who have been interested in getting hooked up and tested. So I'm going to give you like a comparative survey. These are some Alex Gray paintings, which I think depict the energy healing component of all this. Once you start doing this, you sort of cross over into science spirituality. So I'm hanging out there in the science spirituality conversation. Probably the first, in fact, the word therapeutics comes from this Asclepian tradition in Greece, which is really shamanic medicine in classical Greek times. Now, a little word about EEG. The discoverer of EEG was a German psychiatrist, Hans Berger, and he was motivated by a psi incident. He was nearly badly injured by an accident when he was in the army. A canyon almost rolled over him, and that same, describes the story. He received a telegram from his father, I think it says, and his sister had a premonition that he was going to have an accident. So this event marked him for his life, and he was determined that some form of communication, some information had reached him telepathically. And this is why he got into exploring the possibilities of detecting something in the brain. And he used his son initially as a subject to do, and he described the first alpha rhythm and didn't publish until 1929. Okay, these are just some slides to entertain you because these are different healing traditions. I have had the opportunity to work with the Huichol people, the Peyote people in Mexico, and also the ayahuasca Amazonian tradition, the Kuna. So these are all depictions of healers doing work. All right. Everyone wants to know what is the whole summary bottom line of this, and that's a difficult question to answer because I've sampled over 30 healers, perhaps more, but the good data is from about 30. And these are the findings. The dominant frequency band that shows significant changes, consistent, robust, is alpha. Now, there are healers who don't produce the classic alpha. They live in theta, and I'll show you an example of one. And these are kind of a special group. And then there are the individuals that don't have very much alpha for reasons of having had a traumatic brain injury or just they're wired in a different way. And we'll see some data of some of these individuals. And they usually have delta, beta. However, one of them, when he was in the healing state, brought up his alpha, and you'll see that. Okay, so we'll start with, this is a medicine man, Apache, friend of mine, that I had an opportunity to work with, and this was a PowerPoint that we threw together for him. But what it shows is you do a baseline, you do about a 10-minute eyes closed, resting, baseline recording, and then you ask the healer to do their thing. Now, they have to be able to remain motionless relatively, so you won't record movement artifacts. So a lot of it is their ability to go into that state and imagine that they're doing all the things that they do when they're healing. Because you run into healers that say, well, I only work by walking around my client and waving my hands, and I need to have all of this activity. However, most of them you can talk them into just sitting still and imagining it. So this is a case where this man doesn't have very much alpha, in fact, very unusual alpha, which has a focus frontal, left frontal. The traditional common normal alpha is parietal occipital back here. However, he did shift his alpha central. It increased by about 67%. And all of these are called connectivity maps. And you can see these are, coherence is a measure of synchrony between different sites, all the possible combinations of paired sites. So his brain is going into different states. That's the proof right here from these maps. This one shows a similar pattern. It's an asymmetry. Now, the client that he worked with had some head injury issues. And in fact, was a woman that I mapped several times, and every time we would get the same kind of a map. So her EEG signature was quite reliable. And so he shifted it. In particular, these coherence lines. These are Z-scores. This is reference to a database. This is a clinical EEG suite called NeuroGuide. So this moved now to this position. And phase lag is a measure of conduction velocity in the brain. So there's the thick lines are the +3 or more standard deviation Z-scores. And so these shifted as well. She did not show an increase in alpha. She didn't have very much alpha to begin with. That level there, 12 microvolts square, is very much on the low side. Now, let's get into some data here. This is me. I decided it was high time for my EEG to attempt to do a Reiki healing to see if I could also increase my alpha power. And indeed, I was able to do that. So what this gives you is a topographic map with the peak values shown by the scales here. So this is like reading a weather map, okay? So this would be now Denver, and this would be Nova Scotia or something. And so my alpha is highest at PZ, which is the midline parietal, and I increased it by approximately 49%. So more experienced Reiki healers can increase it even further. These are some power frequency spectra. These are FFTs that you compute from the raw EEG. And so this is a quick, convenient way to see changes in frequencies and power. And this is an example from another Reiki healer. Notice the scale here is to 15. That's the highest peak. It's an occipital site. And now look at the scale under Reiki. And so again, these are the topo maps derived from this data. They also show the increased values. So this is the most consistent, robust effect that I see across many healing modalities. And we'll see examples of that. Okay, here's another one. Now, in this case, the client is the one recorded with the EEG. So I've done, most of the tests have been recording from the healer, but I have now a sizable body of data recording from the client receiving the healing. I have not done simultaneous paired recordings of client and healer. That's going to be next. But this was surprising. The clients that are receiving a healing also show a big boost in alpha power. And in this case, this was a very powerful healer who worked on a woman and brought up her alpha. So you can see that it increased by approximately 46%. These are the before and during, I call it the healing state. So in all of these studies, I'm really interested in defining a brain state, a change in a brain state that is occurring during the healing state, during the actual practice of the session. I'm not concerned with the effects of the healing, the outcomes, whether they healed an illness or disease. That's a whole other study that needs to be addressed later. This is recently from a Chinese woman who practices Qigong and some other techniques, and she wanted to be hooked up, and we got a nice 48% increase in her alpha power. So she knew very little of Reiki or Johrei or Pranic healing or any of those other modalities. This is the Theta healer that I worked with, a woman in Texas, who is a well-known healer in the area. You can see that she does not have a normal alpha peak. In fact, her principal frequency is around 6.5 right there. She has a prominent peak. And then she has a beta, low beta peak, which is like a harmonic here at 13 hertz. So this is one of the sessions that we did. Now, she is, well, I should mention this, that Theta healers typically have very high sensitivity to reading. They're empaths. They have access to their subconscious. They often live in a sort of a semi-trance state. In her case, she's all the time. She's communicating with angelic guides, and she's a character. So this is her brain, and now this is the effect of her healing a client, and I had never seen anything like this. His alpha power was increased almost 250% at O2. That's occipital right on this side. And this is called a difference map. This is the topo map derived from this data. And what you do here is you subtract the baseline from the treatment, and the only positive colors show up in the alpha, indicating that this is where the big change happened. It's a very significant change. So that's another quite graphic way to show the changes in the different frequency bands. I had an opportunity years ago to work with Richard Bartlett, the matrix energetics guy. This is when he had long hair and he was living near Seattle and wanted to be tested. So there at the bottom right, he's sending his matrix energetic healing to his daughter, Justice, I believe is her name. And, you know, Richard is a very playful guy and quite in a class of his own. And so what was interesting was he was able to raise the receiver, the client's alpha. This is the before. You see here's the 10 hertz. There's very few scattered peaks, you know. And so you average, this is 300 epochs. Each epoch is about 8 seconds. So, and then when she's receiving the healing, there's now beginning to show a peak at 10. The red bar is the alpha bar. This is Lexicor software. Now I work with a different system, Mitsar amplifiers. But these are compressed spectral arrays, and they show very nicely, and you can just get the numbers right off here, average power, peak to peak. Now, this is Richard Bartlett's brain when he's doing his energy matrix healing. He doesn't have normal alpha, as you can see. Very, very reduced amplitude, not at some sites. These are frontal sites, so I didn't show his occipital sites data. There would probably be more alpha there. But this is what I was able to capture. He generates bursts of gamma. So this was a clear demonstration. He intuited that he was going to go there. He said to me, let's go for gamma because that's where I think I do my work. And indeed, and I have not been able to replicate that with other healers who claim that they also work in gamma frequencies. Now, this is interesting data. This is from a Swami, an Indian Swami, Nithyananda, that I had the opportunity to work with. And he told me that he's always meditating. So his baseline and his meditation maps look almost identical. Okay? These are FFTs, and these are the sites, the 19 channels of the 1020 system. The only difference is a little bit more beta, shown here, this color. In the low beta, around 14 hertz or so, this little green peak. All right. Well, he went into a samadhi state at that same session. Okay. And the only difference there is that he increases his beta. Okay. So quite remarkable. You see the little green peak. Now, when he's doing healing, his alpha comes up. Okay. So this is another indication that even a Swami like that works in alpha. These are the shamans, and I'll just rush through this very quickly. A Peruvian shaman. Here's the alpha increase in the client. This is another shaman, a woman from Oaxaca, the Mazatec tradition. She does something that she calls a singing healing, and her alpha went way up. This is somebody I very recently did who does something called holographic visualization, where she's actually working on the hologram of the body that she's repairing. And so she does intense visualization. Her alpha went up. This is a Deeksha healer. And so the client receiving the healer, big increase in alpha, same thing. Difference map showing the alpha. And now this is a Buddhist monk that I recorded, also in Texas, who could produce alpha when he was doing a very specific type of meditation that involved a visualization task. All right? His alpha changed appreciably during visualization. You can see the peak is off the charts here. Okay, these are just some statistics. This was the early one. Now I have an N of 20 analyzed. Baseline average power values are increased consistently. The numbers are very significant. These are correlated samples. You're looking at a healer as his own self-control. This is values for the clients receiving the healer. I have an N of 9, and also very significant increases in alpha power. So, in conclusion, I think the most important things here are, what does this really mean? Increased power is a result of increased synchrony, increased numbers of neurons communicating and firing together. So this means that more areas of the brain are recruited and are linking up and firing synchronously. Often you see a lot of phase coherence during the alpha increase in power. And how do they get there? Well, most of them say they just let go and they get out of the way. So that, coupled with visualization, would get you into an alpha state. And then I've done some distant healing. A woman from Seattle sending healing to a client in California. We got an alpha increase. This is my most recent data. So it's very exciting because I may be able to increase that sample size and show that this is a really non-local effect. So I'll leave you with that, and I thank you.
Turn that on. Here we go. Much better. All right. If you have any questions, please come over. We've got a few minutes for questions.
Hey there. Your coherence maps, were those just alpha coherence maps?
Yes.
Okay, right. Do you think if you did theta coherence, have you done theta coherence maps?
There's a lot of coherence data that I haven't analyzed it because it's quite complex to analyze coherence. And you don't see anything that looks consistent from trial to trial, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you look at an EEG, you know the complexity of analyzing an EEG. And then when you have many and you're looking for something that you can say this changes systematically, it's a big task. So that's why I focused on the alpha, because that was the most repeatable, reliable, consistent effect. And it's a big effect.
Right.
I like something greater than 30%. I'm an electrophysiologist, and I don't just want to rely on statistics to demonstrate an effect. I want to actually see it in the raw data, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Sure.
thanks.
But I thank you for that. I will look at that.
Hi, I'm Simeon Hine. Can you comment on this machine that I've read about recently that's being used by DARPA to train snipers to do their work faster and better? Apparently they can train to become a sniper twice as fast when they're in an alpha state, but it's induced by a machine, and I'm wondering what the difference is between that and a self-induced alpha state.
I really can't comment because I don't know about this, but I think it's fascinating. Yeah, I do neurofeedback, so you can train to boost your alpha and get into alpha states. And there's a fellow by the name of Jim Hart, who I think now lives in Canada, who used to do alpha training, and he would get people for a week and, you know, put them inside booths and work with alpha training, and, you know, at the end of the week, they were talking to God, apparently, you know. They would have very transformative, transcendent experiences. So, you know, the alpha frequency, it's involved in many, many things. There's many, the most number of papers in EEG research are probably concerned with alpha. It's been studied in innumerable ways. It's involved also in cognition, memory. It's not just an idling rhythm that is a measure of inactivity, right, which is sort of the conventional view of looking at it. So interestingly, I heard a healer many years ago, before I did any of this, who was a chiropractor who would work on a group of people, and he said, "Oh, it's all happening in the alpha band." You know, and I thought, well, how does he know that? You know, has he tested that? And so he was right. You know.
All right. Thank you very much, Juan.